Mr. President, I know we're all talking about the unprecedented times that we're facing in our nation, but I want to talk about something that we have in common, something that's pretty remarkable that I think we all need to remember that we have in common. We represent incredible people, the American people, who are doing so much right now in Alaska, in Colorado, in Nebraska, in Montana, in Connecticut, to help each other. So much. I frequently tell my constituents as we're talking about getting through this crisis, everyone has a role to play. Young, old, business leaders, elected leaders, union members, and everybody is playing a role. So I am very proud of my constituents in Alaska, and I know that everybody in this body is proud of what their constituents are doing right now, the best of our nation. Right now, you know, we talk a lot about how we're teleworking. Well, I like to remind folks that there's some Americans, a lot of Alaskans, thousands, millions, who can't telework. Our healthcare professionals who are on the front lines, our first responders, our truck drivers, port workers, Alaskans who are stocking the grocery store shelves, picking up our refuse, parents who are teaching their children at home, local restaurants who are working day and night to continue to provide takeout food. So many people are doing such good work. There's an incredible outpouring of generosity from all of our citizens, all Americans. We're hearing about it. From our small businesses donating their time and services to help people in their communities, to volunteers, to our nonprofits. So, Mr. President, that's what Alaskans are doing, that's what Americans are doing around the country at this very moment, despite this enormous adversity and challenges that we're facing. One of the most unprecedented challenges in our history. Extraordinary, precarious times right now. People are concerned, obviously, about their health. People are concerned, obviously, about their economic health, their jobs, losing jobs, retirement accounts, life savings, people being told to stay at home, hardworking Americans, Alaskans who have worked their whole lives, who don't know even how they're going to pay for their groceries or rent. And Mr. President, they're taking these actions at a difficult time because local and state governments all across the country are making tough decisions, working with their communities to help make sure that the collective whole of our societies, whether in Anchorage or Fairbanks or other places in America, are going to get through this health crisis. The bottom line is they're coming together, shared sacrifice. And I am so proud of the people I represent, and I know my colleagues on both sides of the aisle are as well. Something that we have a lot in common. Now, there was an article in the Washington Post just the other day, like 2 days ago, and it said something like, you know, America's gotten through a lot of challenges before. World War II, the Civil War. But this article went on to say, but perhaps the American people don't really have the mettle or the resiliency to get through this one. That was kind of the gist of this article. Classic, clueless, inside the Beltway reporting. We're not the same America that got through other challenges. We don't have the mettle. Well, I would suggest these Washington Post reporters need to get out of D.C. Maybe they should come to Alaska. Maybe they should come somewhere else in America. Come to my state. I guarantee you we have the mettle, Mr. President, Alaskans and other great Americans, to get through this crisis. I always say my constituents are some of the most resilient people in the world. Let me just give you a couple examples. Our Alaska Native communities have been thriving for thousands of years in some of the harshest conditions anywhere on the planet. We are a state full of the ancestors of rugged pioneers who came to Alaska looking for promise and stayed to build a great state. In my state, we've had extreme challenges before throughout our history. Earthquakes have flattened our buildings. Tsunamis have wiped out cities. Floods have swept away our homes, entire communities. Wildfires have singed our cities. Volcanic eruptions have dimmed the sun. The price of oil and the markets have dropped before, like we're seeing now. And now we have another unprecedented challenge, a pandemic facing my beloved state and my beloved country. So, Mr. President, as I mentioned, we have a lot in common here. And I think a lot of us, all of us, take pride in what our constituents, our fellow Americans, are doing to come together to fight this. And we will fight it. And we'll emerge stronger and more resilient. And those Washington Post reporters who doubted the will of Americans, maybe in a couple years they'll be writing a story about how wrong they were. And Mr. President, until about a day ago, I was actually proud of the work of this body in responding to this crisis. The past 3 weeks, we have come together, putting together bold, bipartisan pieces of legislation to address this pandemic in a quick amount of time. So what we were calling phase one was just 2 weeks ago, where Congress passed an $8.3 billion package, I won't go into all the details, to address the healthcare needs that we were starting to see with the spread of this pandemic. Phase one. Phase two, just last week, again, members of the body, this body coming together. It wasn't a perfect bill, that's for sure. Came over from the House that provided federal funds so individuals exposed to the virus can get healthy and that our hospitals have more resources to combat this health crisis. The president passed it the day we passed it here in the Senate, just last week. Bold, bipartisan work. This legislation, for example, expanded emergency food assistance, including for children who rely on free and reduced lunches for school cafeterias who could no longer access those meals because the schools are closing. New paid sick leave, 100% dollar for dollar that would be paid and reimbursed by the federal government. So we acted, Mr. President, we acted. These weren't perfect pieces of legislation. I didn't like every provision in them, but we got together, Democrats, Republicans, and we acted quickly and boldly. And that's what our constituents want us to do. But we knew we had to do much, much more. Much, much more, because every day there's a new development that we're seeing, not just on the health side, but on the economic side. So what did we do? The last week, everybody here rolled up their sleeves, around the clock. And again, I was proud of the work that we started on. And by the way, this was bipartisan work. I was talking to Democratic senators all weekend. When you listen to the chairman of the Finance Committee, he talked about the task force that we had, Democrats and Republicans, putting together legislation, big, bold legislations coming together like we had on phase one and phase two, to really focus in 4 key areas, Mr. President. Putting cash directly in the hands of hurting families in Alaska, throughout the country, delivering rapid relief to the small businesses that are being crushed by this pandemic and laying off their workers, stabilizing key industries to avoid massive layoffs that are now very quickly coming on the horizon and starting to happen in America, and sending new resources to medical professionals who are on the front lines. That's what our goals were. And we needed to do it in a big way. We completed this, the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, in less than a week. Why? Because we knew, all of us knew, the people that we represent were hurting, are hurting, and they need hope. And they're looking for us for that hope. Again, wasn't perfect. This bill isn't perfect, but it's pretty remarkable work to do in less than a week. And this bill represents a huge and massive effort to help the people we represent. Now, a lot of my colleagues have been coming down on the floor talking about what this bill will do for the people we represent. I'm not going to go into all the details, but let me just name a few, because some of them were ideas from our Democratic colleagues. Some of them where we had certain amounts in the bill, they came and said, no, we want more. Okay. All right, we worked with you, just like we did on phase 1 and phase 2. So I'll just mention a few. I've been talking to a lot of the elected leaders throughout my state, making a lot of calls. What do you need? What's happening? How can we help? I had a phone call just a few days ago with the mayor of Anchorage. That's my hometown. And everybody's working hard. The mayor is, the governor, who's doing a good job, a really good job, his team. We're all working together. Mayor's a Democrat, governor's a Republican. I'm reaching out to everybody. It doesn't matter party at this moment, that's for darn sure. What did the mayor say to me? Priority has to be people need cash, Senator, to pay the rent, to get food, to get a car payment. There's so much uncertainty. Can we do that? Yes, we can do that. We did it. It's in the bill. $2,400 per couple, $500 per additional child. That's going to help. That's going to help with families who need cash. That's one thing. We did a massive increase, another thing, to the unemployment insurance program. $250 billion. $250 billion. Why? Because we're seeing massive layoffs. Now, I'm going to give my colleagues, a couple Democratic colleagues, friends of mine are on the floor right now. This was a big idea that you wanted to push. Big number. It's a big number. $250 billion. This is going to significantly expand the number of individuals who are eligible to receive benefits. This is really important for my state, particularly the self-employed, the fishermen who have never been covered under the UI programs in the past. And what's more, the bill provides a flat increase in benefits, $600 per week to all state programs in the next few months. So workers who are forced onto unemployment, which unfortunately we're seeing hundreds of thousands across the country, have the financial security to pay their bills and stay afloat. So this is another big element of this bill. Let me provide one more. I think one of the most important. And I think there's really strong bipartisan agreement on this one. I know it, because I talk to my friends who are Democrats. A small business rescue package and relief package of about $350 billion to enable small businesses to access credit and have the liquidity to stay afloat and weather this storm. Not creating a new bureaucracy, but an expansion of the Small Business Administration's 7A loan program so you can do it through local banks in your state. The idea here, Mr. President, is to make sure the worker and the employers of our small businesses stay connected. Small businesses can take out a loan of up to $10 million under this program, and if they use that loan to pay for payroll and rent and other fixed costs, this loan is going to be completely forgiven. Whenever I describe this to my fellow Alaskans, they say, this is exactly the kind of thing we need, Senator, right now, as businesses are closing. So that's in. That's in the bill. Cash in the hands of small businesses so they can keep workers employed and be ready to get back up and grow and prosper again when we get through this pandemic. That's in the bill. Everybody agrees with that. And finally, another element, and I'm just describing some of the elements, Mr. President, but I wanted to highlight some of these things, is getting more resources to the men and women on the front lines of this pandemic who are every day out there in the healthcare industry trying to keep Americans, Alaskans, healthy and alive. How much? There's a lot in it, but the number's $100 billion for hospitals, for healthcare providers. Let me say that again. $100 billion. Now, the minority leader was on the floor the other day. I was kind of stunned when he said something along the lines of, this partisan bill, by the way, it's not partisan, okay? This was written by Republicans, Democrats. A lot of these ideas are from both sides. Doesn't do anything to help hospitals. We need a Marshall Plan to help them. Well, I think $100 billion is a pretty good start. That's in the bill. So, Mr. President, as I mentioned, I've been proud of the work of this body. I've been proud of my colleagues, both sides of the aisle. No one's got wisdom on how to fix all this. No one knows what's coming in the future. But I think all of us know that we need to act, and we need to act boldly, and we need to act in a bipartisan way. And we did it. We did it. Again, in less than a week. It's not a perfect bill, that's for sure, but it's going to provide help to my fellow Alaskans, to Americans. It's massive, it's bold, it's bipartisan, it's timely. And as of yesterday, I thought we were going to go another bill out to the American people quickly. Hope. That's what they need. Yes, the Senate's working. And then for whatever reason, and I'm not going to point fingers, the wheels started to come off on this one, the one that we really need. And the bill has been filibustered. That means we can't even get on the floor to debate it. Can't start debating it. Now, look, I've been listening to my colleagues, both sides of the aisle. There's been a lot of anger on this floor, a lot of back and forth. My good friend from Nebraska just talked about this idea that somehow my colleagues on the other side filibustered this bill that the Senate has been working on to make room for Speaker Pelosi's bill. I really, really, really hope that's not true. I really hope that's not true. I don't think there's one member of this body, Republican or Democrat, who could defend that, what Senator Sass just read on the floor. And then there started to be talk about, well, the bill that we had that we're focused on is all about bailouts. That's a charged term, Mr. President, as you know. But you could talk about the 2008-2009 TARP bill. I wasn't a member of the Senate then during the financial crisis as a bailout. I think that's a good description. Why was that a bailout? Because you had people on Wall Street taking risky actions that eventually cratered the financial system. By the way, they made a ton of money doing it. Cratered the economy. And then they had to be bailed out because the banks were going to go under and it was going to ruin the U.S. economy. That's a bailout. That's a classic bailout. But, Mr. President, what we're seeing right now is much more like a natural disaster, much more like a war. There's no one to be blamed right now. The airlines shouldn't be blamed for happening what's happening right now? This is a pandemic. So this term being thrown around, oh, it's a bailout. What we're trying to do is help the American worker, help the American family. It's not a perfect bill, but we are dealing with a natural disaster. Something came over from overseas onto our shores, and we're now all trying to deal with it. Mr. President, I'm going to conclude by saying I'm on this side of the aisle. I'm a Republican with principled views on certain issues. I certainly have strong views about protecting my state. But I've also tried to work throughout my time in the Senate with my colleagues on both sides. Some of my closest friends are my Democratic friends, and I'm proud of that work. That's how you get things done in this body. Some I've been working with all weekend. This issue should not be about partisan politics. So my point was not to come down here on the floor and make this a partisan speech. We are facing one of the most unprecedented challenges in the history of the United States of America. We certainly need to move beyond politics. And if you looked at what was going on in the Senate until yesterday, that's exactly what we've been doing for the past 3 weeks. Are there areas of compromise in this bill that hopefully can unlock things? Sure. 2 that I've been working on and supporting, again, with my Democratic colleagues, pressing my colleagues on. Could we have more transparency on this federal facility program? Sure. Absolutely, I would be very supportive of this. Are there ways to help shore up distressed pensions for the great working men and women who build things in America? Yes. But, Mr. President, we're running out of time. We are running out of time. We need to pass this bill now. And why do we need to pass this bill now? Because it's going to help the people we represent. It's going to help people in Connecticut and Virginia and Colorado and Montana and Alaska. And they need hope. They need hope right now. And again, this bill isn't perfect, but it's got a lot of hope. And once we pass it, then all of us are going to need to do the hard work to making sure that the implementation of this bill goes as effective and smoothly as possible. And then when we see mistakes in it, which there will be, we need to come back here and act to correct those. That's what we need to do. These are exceptional times for our country, Mr. President. We had an influenza outbreak in 1918 that ravaged the world, and it particularly ravaged my state. As Senator Murkowski said earlier today, one of the things that's got a lot of us troubled in Alaska was 100 years ago when the influenza came through, it did finally get to some of our Alaska Native villages. I have over 200 communities not connected by roads with very limited healthcare facilities. And during the Spanish influenza, many of these communities were completely wiped out. Scary time. Scary time. But we're going to get through it. We're going to get through it stronger, more resilient, and the way we're going to do it is if we're all working together, which we had been until about 24 hours ago. So I think the provisions outlined in this bill, while not perfect, are what the American people are looking for. They can help minimize the damage done by this pandemic, and I certainly hope that we come together the way we have been for the last 3 weeks in a bipartisan way to get this voted on, passed as quickly as possible, because every hour delay imperils the incredible American people that we represent. I yield the floor.